There is a code inside prison walls that exists because the law cannot reach everything. It is not written down. It is not enforced by any institution. It has no official name. But every person who has spent time inside a correctional facility understands it the same way they understand the temperature of a room, through the skin, through the instinct, through the accumulated knowledge of what happens when it is broken. The code is simple. You do not testify against the man who trusted you. Raymond Cole broke that code in a federal prosecutor's office on a Tuesday morning in October 2009. He sat across a table from 2 assistant United States attorneys and told them everything he knew about the man who had spent 18 months helping him prepare the legal documents that got him out of prison. He did not do it out of fear. He did not do it because he had been caught. He did it because the prosecutors had something he wanted: a reduced sentence on new charges he had accumulated within 14 months of his release. And the information they wanted in exchange was information that only one person in the world could provide. That person was Marcus Webb. Marcus was still inside when Raymond made the deal. Still in the cell they had shared for 18 months. Still believing, because he had no reason not to believe, that the man he had helped was living a different life somewhere and carrying the gratitude that a person carries when someone gives them back their freedom. He was not carrying gratitude. He was sitting in a federal building itemizing everything Marcus had ever told him in the privacy of a shared cell, trading it piece by piece for the reduction of his own exposure. By the time Marcus found out, the damage was done. The testimony was recorded, the deal was sealed, and a sentence that had been approaching its end was extended by 11 years. This is the story of Marcus Webb. This is what it costs to trust the wrong person in the one place where trust is the only currency you have left. This is an untold wrong. Marcus Webb was born in 1971 in Gary, Indiana. He was the third of 4 children in a household that was held together by his mother, Diane, through a combination of determination, faith, and the specific competence that certain women develop when the alternative to competence is catastrophe. His father left when Marcus was 9, not dramatically. He simply became less present over a period of months, and then one day was not present at all. Marcus remembered this, not as a rupture, but as a slow subtraction. A man who had been in the house and then was not, and the house continuing without him in the way that houses do. Gary, Indiana, in the 1980s, was a city in extended collapse. The steel industry that had built it was dying. The population that had followed the steel was leaving. What remained in the neighborhoods where Marcus grew up was the specific atmosphere of a place that has been abandoned by the economic forces that created it. Not poverty exactly, though poverty was present, but a kind of institutional fatigue, a community that had outlasted its own purpose and was still trying to determine what came next. Marcus was intelligent. His teachers noted this consistently through his school records. A boy with genuine analytical capability, a reader, a student who could hold complex arguments in his head and turn them over until he understood them from every angle. He had the kind of mind that in a different environment with different inputs produces lawyers or professors or engineers. In Gary in the mid-1980s, it produced something else. He was recruited into a street organization at 15, not through intimidation, through the more effective mechanism of belonging. The sense that here were people who saw him, who valued what he could do, who offered a structure and a purpose and an income at an age when those things were not available to him through any legitimate channel. By 18, he was running numbers for a mid-level operation. By 21, he was managing distribution for a section of the South Side. By 24, he had accumulated enough exposure that his arrest, when it came in 1995, was not a surprise to anyone who knew him, least of all to Marcus himself, who had understood for years that the life he was living had a statistical endpoint that he had been moving toward, with the inevitability of a man walking toward a wall in a dark room. He was arrested in November 1995 on charges of conspiracy to distribute and possession with intent. Federal charges, which meant federal sentencing guidelines, which meant the kind of numbers that reorder a young man's understanding of what his life is going to look like. He was convicted in 1997, sentenced to 22 years. He was 26 years old. He would not be eligible for release until he was in his late 40s, assuming good behavior, assuming no complications, assuming the long arithmetic of incarceration went in his favor every year for 2 decades. He went in. The first years were the hardest. This is not unique to Marcus. The first years are hardest for everyone. The period when the reality of the sentence meets the reality of the institution, and the mind has not yet developed the mechanisms for managing the collision. Marcus was young and sharp, and full of the specific anger of a man who understood exactly how he had arrived, where he was, and could not find, in that understanding, anything that made it feel less permanent. He read extensively and without discrimination. His mother brought books when she visited. He worked through the prison library. He read law, not with any specific plan at first, simply because the law was the system that had processed him, and he wanted to understand it the way you want to understand the machine that is holding you. By his 5th year inside, the reading had become purposeful. He understood criminal procedure with a depth that some practicing attorneys would have found respectable. He understood appellate process, the standards of review for different types of claims, the specific arguments that had succeeded and failed in cases similar to his. He understood the gap between what the law allowed and what people inside were actually receiving in terms of legal representation. He began helping people, not for payment. There was nothing to pay with. He helped because he could, and because helping gave the knowledge purpose, and because purpose inside a correctional facility is the rarest and most essential resource available. He helped men write letters to their attorneys. He helped men understand what their attorneys had told them. He reviewed filings. He identified procedural errors. He explained in plain language the difference between a direct appeal and a habeas petition, and when each was appropriate. He developed a reputation. The reputation spread in the way that reputations spread inside. Through word of mouth, through demonstrated results, through the specific trust that a man earns when he gives his time and knowledge without agenda. This reputation was what Raymond Cole had heard about when he arrived at the Terre Haute Federal Correctional Institution in January 2008. Raymond Cole was 34 years old when he arrived at Terre Haute. He had been sentenced to 6 years on a weapons charge that had been complicated by his prior record, 2 previous convictions that had elevated what might have been a 2-year sentence into something significantly heavier. He was not a sophisticated criminal. He was not organized or strategic. He was a man who had made a series of incremental bad decisions over 15 years and had arrived at their logical conclusion. He was assigned to Marcus Webb's housing unit. They were cellmates within 3 weeks. The dynamic between them was established quickly. Raymond recognized immediately that Marcus was operating on a different intellectual level than most of the men around him. Marcus recognized that Raymond was in a specific kind of legal trouble. His prior record had been used in ways that Raymond's original attorney had not adequately challenged, and there were arguments available on appeal that had not been made. Marcus told him this within the first month of their shared cell. Raymond asked if Marcus would help him. Marcus said yes. Over the following 18 months, Marcus worked on Raymond's case with the systematic attention he brought to everything he studied. He reviewed the original trial record. He identified 3 specific arguments for appeal: a sentencing guidelines calculation error, an ineffective assistance of counsel claim related to the prior record issue, and a procedural challenge to one of the prior convictions used to enhance the sentence. He wrote the briefs. He explained every argument to Raymond in detail. He prepared Raymond for the possibility that the appeal would succeed on some grounds and fail on others, and helped him understand what each outcome would mean said practically. Raymond Cole was released on modified sentence in August 2009. The appeal had succeeded on 2 of the 3 grounds Marcus had identified. His sentence was reduced. He walked out of Terre Haute with 14 months shaved off his remaining time. Marcus watched him leave. He shook Raymond's hand the morning of his release. Raymond told him he would not forget what he had done. He said it with the conviction of a man who means it in the moment. And Marcus, who was not a naive man, understood the difference between what people say at moments of relief and what they actually carry forward. He did not expect gratitude to be a permanent condition. He did not expect Raymond to spend his freedom in service of the man who had helped him earn it. He expected Raymond to disappear, to build his life, to become someone who had moved past the experience of incarceration and all the people inside it. He did not expect what actually happened. Raymond Cole had been free for 14 months when he was arrested again. A federal charge, different jurisdiction, arising from activities in the months after his release. The charge carried significant exposure, potentially a decade, given his record and the nature of the offense. He was facing the prospect of returning to exactly where he had come from. The federal prosecutors handling his new case wanted something. They had an ongoing investigation into criminal activity with connections to the Terre Haute facility, specifically to a network of organized activity that had operated inside and outside the prison during the period between 2004 and 2009. They believed Marcus Webb had knowledge of this network, either as a participant or as someone who had been told things by the men he helped. In a shared cell, men talk. This is the fundamental truth that the prosecutors were operating on. A man who has been living 6 feet from another man for 18 months, helping him with the most stressful and consequential legal process of his life, has heard things, has been trusted with things, has been told things in the specific intimacy of a shared space where the walls provide the illusion of privacy. Raymond confirmed to the prosecutors that Marcus had, over the course of their 18 months together, shared information about people and activities that was relevant to their investigation. Whether this information was shared in confidence, whether it was shared casually, whether it was shared with any understanding that it might someday be used in this way. None of that was relevant to the prosecutors. What was relevant was that Raymond Cole was willing to provide it, under oath, in exchange for a significant reduction in his new charges. The deal was finalized in November 2009. Marcus was informed of the situation through his attorney in December 2009. The notification arrived as a filing in his case, a motion by federal prosecutors to revoke certain good behavior provisions of his sentence based on new information about his conduct and associations during the period of his incarceration. The new information was Raymond Cole's testimony. Marcus read the filing in the prison law library. He read it twice. Then he sat for a long time without moving. The man he had spent 18 months helping. The man whose appeal he had written from scratch. The man who had shaken his hand the morning he walked out and said he would not forget. He had not forgotten. He had just repurposed the memory. The legal consequences of Raymond's testimony unfolded over the following 18 months with the systematic efficiency of a federal process that had been carefully prepared. The information Raymond provided was used in 3 ways. First, it was incorporated into the ongoing investigation into the prison network, providing corroboration for evidence the prosecutors already had and filling gaps in the timeline they were constructing. Second, it was used as the basis for the motion to revoke Marcus's sentence modifications, the good behavior provisions that had been reducing his projected release date incrementally over the years. Third, it was presented to a federal grand jury as part of a broader case that resulted, in 2011, in new charges being filed against Marcus related to his alleged participation in the network during his incarceration. The new charges were specific and documented. They drew on conversations Raymond had reported on alleged communications that prosecutors claimed Marcus had facilitated between parties inside and outside the facility, and on financial records that, prosecutors argued, showed Marcus had received benefits in exchange for services provided to the network. Marcus denied the charges. His position, consistently and specifically, was that his role inside the facility had been legal assistance, that the knowledge Raymond had attributed to him was information shared in the context of legal work, protected by principles of confidentiality that should have made it inadmissible. This argument had merit in theory. In practice, the protections Raymond had violated in sharing the information were moral rather than legal. Marcus was not Raymond's attorney. He was a fellow inmate providing informal assistance. The attorney-client privilege that would have protected formally provided legal advice did not extend to his situation. The information Raymond shared was, from a strictly legal standpoint, shareable. The new charges were tried in 2011. Marcus was convicted on 2 of the 4 counts. The sentence added 11 years to his remaining time. He had been due to be eligible for parole consideration in 2013. The new sentence pushed that eligibility to 2024. His mother Diane was 61 years old when the new sentence was handed down. She sat in the courtroom for every day of the trial. She was present for the verdict. She did not cry in the courtroom. She cried in the parking lot afterward, leaning against her car, while Marcus's sister held her. Diane had visited Marcus every month without exception since 1997. She had driven 3 hours each way to Terre Haute for 14 years, because that was what she had decided she would do, and she did not renegotiate decisions she had made about her children. She would now be doing it for 25 years total, minimum, if nothing changed. She was not a woman who expressed bitterness easily. She had built her life around forward movement, the refusal to spend energy on what could not be changed. But in a conversation with a journalist several years later, she described the period after the second sentencing as the only time in her adult life when she genuinely did not know how to continue. Not because of Marcus specifically, because of what had been done to him by someone he had helped. Because of the specific calculation that Raymond Cole had made, that the freedom Marcus had helped him earn was worth less to him than a reduction in his new exposure. She said, "He used Marcus like a tool and put him down when the tool was no longer needed." Inside Terre Haute, Marcus processed what had happened in the only way available to him, through continued work. He kept helping men with their cases, not out of naivety, not out of a failure to learn the lesson that Raymond had taught him, but because the alternative was to become something smaller, to contract into a version of himself that had been reshaped by what had been done to him. He helped men. He was more careful about what he shared. He was more deliberate about the distinction between professional assistance and personal disclosure. He built a wall inside himself that had not been necessary before Raymond, and he maintained it without drama or announcement. But the years accumulated. 2010 became 2012, became 2015. His mother got older. His nieces and nephews grew up in photographs she brought on visits. The outside world moved at its normal pace, and Marcus watched it through the specific window that incarceration provides, close enough to see the movement, completely separated from its momentum. He did not stop believing that the second conviction would eventually be addressed. He had read enough law to understand that the arguments around the admissibility of Raymond's testimony, while unsuccessful at trial, were not exhausted. The intersection of informal legal assistance and the protections that should attach to it was a developing area of case law. Cases were being decided that had not been decided when Marcus went to trial in 2011. He watched those cases the way a man watches weather from a window, with attention and patience, and the understanding that he could not control what was coming, but could be ready when it arrived. The turning point arrived in the form of a law student named Angela Torres. She was a third-year student at Indiana University's McKinney School of Law in 2016, when she was assigned to the school's wrongful conviction clinic as part of her practical requirement. The clinic reviewed cases from Indiana federal facilities. Marcus Webb's file was one of 20 she was given to assess for potential merit. She spent 3 days with his file before she brought it to her supervising professor. The case she had found was not about the original 1997 conviction. She had no argument to offer on that front. The original case was solid, and the appeals had been exhausted years earlier. What she had found was in the 2011 trial, specifically in the question of Raymond Cole's testimony and the framework under which it had been admitted. Since 2011, 2 federal circuit courts had issued opinions in cases involving the testimony of individuals who had received informal legal assistance from fellow inmates. The opinions were not identical in their reasoning, but both had found that where a relationship of legal assistance had been established, even informally, even between non-attorneys, there were due process concerns with the unrestricted use of confidential communications from that relationship as prosecutorial evidence. These opinions post-dated Marcus's 2011 trial. They were not controlling precedent in the Seventh Circuit, where Marcus's case lived, but they were persuasive authority. They represented a developing consensus that the specific type of testimony Raymond Cole had provided existed in a legally problematic space. Angela Torres wrote a 40-page memo arguing that Marcus's 2011 conviction was vulnerable to a habeas challenge on due process grounds, drawing on the post-trial circuit opinions as the foundation. Her supervising professor read the memo twice. Then he made a call. The clinic filed a habeas petition in Marcus Webb's case in September 2016. The petition was specific and narrow. It did not challenge the original conviction, did not claim actual innocence, and did not make arguments that had already been rejected. It focused exclusively on the admissibility of Raymond Cole's testimony in the 2011 trial and the due process implications of using confidential legal communications as prosecutorial evidence. The Federal District Court denied the petition in 2017. The clinic appealed. The Seventh Circuit Court of Appeals heard oral argument in Marcus Webb's habeas case in March 2019. Angela Torres had graduated by then, but followed the case closely. The supervising professor argued the appeal himself. The Seventh Circuit issued its opinion in August 2019. The court found, in a 2-to-1 decision, that the admission of Raymond Cole's testimony at Marcus's 2011 trial had created a due process violation. The majority opinion drew on the post-2011 circuit decisions and extended their reasoning to the Seventh Circuit for the first time. The court held that where a relationship of informal legal assistance had been established through consistent conduct over an extended period, specifically the 18 months of active case preparation that Marcus had provided, the communications within that relationship carried sufficient confidentiality expectations to implicate due process when used against the person who had provided the assistance. The 2011 conviction was vacated. The 11 years added to Marcus's sentence were removed. His parole eligibility, which had been pushed to 2024 by the second conviction, reverted to the original calculation. He became immediately eligible for parole consideration. He was reviewed by the parole board in December 2019. He was granted release in February 2020. He walked out of Terre Haute Federal Correctional Institution on February 11, 2020. He had been inside for 23 years. He was 48 years old. His mother, Diane, was standing in the parking lot. She was 70 years old. She had driven 3 hours to be there, as she had driven 3 hours every month for 23 years, and she was standing beside her car in the February cold, and she did not cry this time. The justice in Marcus Webb's case was partial and specific. This needs to be stated clearly, without romanticizing what the Seventh Circuit's opinion actually accomplished. It vacated a conviction. It removed 11 years from his sentence. It got him out of prison at 48 rather than at 59. These are not small things. They are significant legal and practical outcomes that required years of work by Angela Torres and her supervising professor and the legal clinic that had reviewed 20 files and found his. What the justice did not do was address the original conviction. Marcus Webb was guilty of the conduct that produced the 1997 sentence. He knew this. He had never claimed otherwise. The habeas petition did not touch the original case. He was released having served a sentence that, with the vacated 11 years removed, represented the full length of what he had originally been given. He did not walk out a free man in the sense of a man who was wrongfully convicted from the beginning. He walked out a man who had served his time and had 11 additional years. Stolen years, years taken through another man's testimony, returned to him. He was 48 years old. His mother was 70. His nieces and nephews were adults. His hometown had changed in ways that 23 years of absence make inevitable. The world he re-entered was not the world he had left, and the man who re-entered it was not the man who had left it. Raymond Cole had served his reduced sentence on the new charges and had been released in 2013. By the time Marcus walked out in 2020, Raymond's whereabouts were not publicly known. He had not faced any criminal charges related to the testimony he had provided. The deal he had made was legal. The testimony he had given was legally admissible at the time, and the subsequent vacating of Marcus's conviction did not retroactively make what Raymond had done a crime. Marcus was asked about Raymond Cole in an interview conducted in 2021 by a journalist writing about the Seventh Circuit opinion and its implications for prison legal assistance programs. He was quiet for a moment before answering. He said, "What Raymond did was legal. I want to be precise about that. He made a deal. He provided testimony. The system accepted it. The system was wrong to accept it, which is what the court eventually found. But Raymond operated within what was available to him. He said, I don't carry what he did as something that needs to be resolved between me and him. What needed to be resolved was in the law. The law resolved it. He said, I'm more interested in what comes next than in what he is. What came next for Marcus was the law itself. He enrolled in a paralegal certification program in Indianapolis in 2021. He began working with a non-profit legal organization that provided assistance to incarcerated individuals in Indiana and Illinois. He became, in the formal and certificated sense, the thing he had already been for 2 decades inside Terre Haute. A person who helped men understand the system, that held them and find the arguments within it that belonged to them. In 2022, the Seventh Circuit opinion in his case was cited by 2 other federal district courts in cases involving the testimony of inmate legal assistants. The legal principle that Angela Torres had identified in a third-year law school clinic had become, through the appeal and through the subsequent citations, a developing body of precedent that would protect men in situations similar to Marcus's in jurisdictions across the circuit. Angela Torres, by 2022, a practicing attorney in Chicago, noted in a Bar Journal article that the Webb opinion had created exactly the kind of protection that the informal legal assistance system inside prisons had always needed. She wrote that the case was, in a specific and technical sense, a victory for the law rather than for Marcus individually. That Marcus had simply been the person through whom an important legal principle had found its case. Marcus read the article. He was asked for a comment. He said, "I'll take it." There are 2 men at the center of this story. It is worth giving both of them their full weight before deciding what the story means. Marcus Webb spent 23 years inside a federal correctional facility. In that time, he developed a knowledge and capability that he used, without compensation, to help men who had nothing to offer him except the chance to put his mind to work on something real. He helped Raymond Cole because Raymond Cole needed help, and Marcus could provide it. He did not help Raymond because he trusted him completely. Marcus was not a naive man. He helped him because the assistance was something he was capable of giving, and the situation called for it. This is not a story about naivety. It is a story about the specific vulnerability of generosity in an environment where generosity is the exception rather than the norm. Raymond Cole was not a monster. This is important to say plainly. He was a man who had returned to the outside world and found himself, within 14 months, facing the prospect of losing that world again. He had a choice: carry the debt of what Marcus had done for him, or use what he knew about Marcus to purchase a reduced exposure. He made a calculation. The calculation was rational in the narrowest possible sense. It served his immediate interest at the cost of someone else's freedom. The morality of that calculation is clear. The legality of it, at the time, was also clear. It was permitted. The law had not yet caught up to the ethics of the situation. It took a third-year law student with a 40-page memo and a 2-to-1 decision from the Seventh Circuit to close the gap between what the law allowed and what it should have allowed. The gap existed because the people most affected by it, incarcerated individuals providing informal legal assistance, were not people with institutional power to shape the law that governed their situation. They were inside. Their voice in the formal legal conversation was limited to the cases they could bring, the arguments they could make, the rare moments when someone outside paid sufficient attention to see what was happening. Angela Torres paid attention. For 3 days, as a third-year law student with 20 files on her desk, she looked at Marcus Webb's case carefully enough to see what was there. The entire outcome, the habeas petition, the Seventh Circuit opinion, the 11 years returned, the precedent established, rests on 3 days of a law student's attention. This is not a comforting observation. The justice in this story is real, but it is also contingent. It required a specific person to look at a specific file at a specific moment and have the capability and the institutional support to do something with what she found. Most people in Marcus Webb's situation do not get Angela Torres. Most people in his situation serve the extra years and come out older, and the legal principle that should have protected them remains unestablished because their case never found its way to a court willing to address it. The lesson from Marcus Webb's story is not that justice is reliable, it is that justice is possible, which is a different and more honest claim. The difference matters because it determines what a person does with the years between the wrong and its potential correction. Marcus Webb spent those years doing the same thing he had been doing before Raymond Cole walked into his cell and after Raymond Cole walked out of the prison. He helped men. He read law. He built knowledge. He refused to become smaller than what had been done to him. He did not know that Angela Torres was coming. He did not know that the Seventh Circuit would eventually hear his case. He did not spend his years inside in strategic preparation for a legal outcome he had no reason to expect. He spent them in the way he had always spent them, putting his mind to work on the problems in front of him, for the people in front of him, because that was who he was, and he had decided that no single betrayal would redefine that. There is a specific kind of strength that this requires. Not the dramatic strength of a man who fights visibly and loudly against the system that holds him. The quieter strength of a man who decides, in the absence of any external validation that the decision is correct, that he will remain himself. Raymond Cole took 11 years. He did not take that, and the 11 years came back. The years spent as a smaller version of himself, the contracted, guarded, hardened version that betrayal invites a person to become. Those years, if Marcus had lived them, would not have come back with the Seventh Circuit opinion. They would have been spent, gone. The permanent cost of allowing what was done to him to define what he did next. He did not pay that cost. He paid a different one. The cost of remaining open in a closed world, of continuing to help in a place where help had been weaponized against him. That cost was real, but it was a cost he chose. The last thing worth saying is about Raymond Cole's location in all of this. He is somewhere, living a life that is not this story. The reduced sentence he purchased with Marcus's testimony served its purpose. He spent less time inside because of what he told the prosecutors. That is the only outcome he was seeking, and it is the outcome he received. He is not in this story's ending. He was a mechanism, the instrument through which a wrong was committed, and, eventually, through the response it generated, an important legal principle was established. He is not a villain in the operatic sense. He is a man who made a rational calculation that was also a moral failure, and who has lived since 2013 with whatever that calculation costs a person to carry. Marcus Webb does not know what that costs Raymond Cole. He has said more than once that he does not think about it. He has said, "I have enough of my own life to think about." He is 49 years old. He works with men who need help understanding the system that holds them. He is, in the most accurate sense available, doing what he was always going to do, with the mind he was always going to have. 11 years late, but doing it. Some wrongs cannot be prevented. They can only be survived with enough of yourself intact to build with what remains. Marcus Webb built. That is the whole story. This has been Untold Wrongs. A man spent 18 months helping his cellmate earn his freedom. His cellmate spent 14 months of that freedom helping federal prosecutors extend his sentence by 11 years. A third-year law student with 40 pages of argument eventually gave those 11 years back. The record is correct. Subscribe for a new story every week. Real betrayals, real consequences, untold wrongs. Until next time.